computer. Okay, so aloha mai kako. Welcome. Today is October 28th, 2021. Thank you all for joining us today on the KOʻA Call. Thank you, Noelani and Austin, for coming in today to share with our networks about your work and what you folks have proposed. Just a disclaimer, the views and the mana'o shared by Austin and Noi are of their program, right? KOʻA doesn't have a specific position on this matter. Really, we're holding these conversations so we can become informed and develop dialogue really about these kind of projects. Yeah. So with that, Manao, I hope we can have a productive, generative conversation. But please do share your feelings and what you have on your mind. Again, the material that will be shared will get sent out to everybody. The recording will get uploaded. So, yeah. So with that, thank you, Noelani and Austin. And we're really, really eager to learn about your work and yeah, just to learn. So I'll pass it to you and mahalo nui.
Mahalo, Nigel, and aloha, everyone. And thank you for your generosity and time for allowing us to join your meeting today. We greatly appreciate it. My name is Noi. I see some familiar faces and I'm excited to see you in the room. And for those of you who I haven't met, I hope that throughout the next 10 to 12 years of this process, we continue to be in dialogue and share. The one thing I want to make very clear is we're super early in the process and our effort has always been very proactive. We're not here to ask anyone to take a position on the project. We're really here to try to introduce who we are, share information on the project, and really try to see if we could please begin a dialogue, because we want to know as much as we can from everyone about this, because we actually have the time to be able to study things and to design things in ways that may be able to work with everyone's interests. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Austin and we do have a presentation real quick. We welcome all the questions and answers as well, but our presentation just really kind of goes over the information, the timeline, where we're talking about, and sets a baseline so that we can have the discussion. So if it's okay with you, I'll share screen and Austin can start presenting.
Awesome. Hello, everybody, real quick. I'm Austin Kino. For those of you I haven't met, I see a lot of familiar faces, but grew up over here in Mauna Lua Bay and been a part of this project for a little over 3 years. I kind of met Noi right at the end of my stint on the worldwide voyage and got interested in looking at, ways we can bring Malama Honua back to our home after the voyage. And we connected and through my interest in wind, and this is kind of the path that's led me. So yeah, mahalo for all your time today. So we'll try and get started. So first off, this is a view from our project site, roughly about, I think we went out and visited with our team, roughly about 12 miles off of kind of Makapu'u east side. So to kind of give you an idea of the area at first, we're kind of talking about as we get into what the program's about. Okay. Next slide. All right. So this is pretty much our picture on Oahu right now of how our energy breakdown. This comes from a site called Island Pulse. This was taken yesterday, I believe at 2 p.m. Just so you guys can kind of see at peak usage, right? Our megawatts on island was about 753. And you guys can kind of see in the graph how we're getting that energy, right? So heavily reliant on oil. According to, transcending oil, we spend in Hawaii roughly about $5 billion a year. Huge dependence on imported petroleum, and contributes to really Hawaii having the highest average retail electricity price, which I'm sure I don't need to tell all of you guys, right? As people who all have to pay for electric. So right now, even we know out of that source, one of the leading contributors to our CO2 emissions is our coal generation, right? And so we know that that power source is going to be kind of ending in 2022 with a contract that's coming up. Okay, next slide. Due to the way, you know, that Hawaii has powering itself, not just Hawaii's problem, but really as in the Western, you know, world, we know that all of this climate change has really affected all of us. And I'm sure looking at just some of these photos, you guys can relate in some way, right? We know that Hawaii is getting warmer, approximately 1 degree Fahrenheit, which in 2018, you know, Hawaii had about 32 record hot days, which led to an increase of wildfires and brush fires, especially for those in the outer islands and Oahu. With all that buildup of hot air right in the tropics, we've actually had a new category of superstorms. We now have category 6 hurricanes in the Pacific. With all these waters around Hawaii getting warmer, more acidic, less oxygen, we've seen a lot of incidents of coral bleaching, a lowering of that seabed floor, and kind of as, you know, with the reef unable to protect us from the waves coming, right? We see that big increase in the coastal erosion, especially as we approach our winter season. You know, we can kind of see how it's going to affect us on the North Shore. With the projections of what, if we don't do anything, the sea level rising about half a foot by 2030 is going to have a huge impact. And, you know, some of our scientists have already modeled out what different parts of Oahu are going to look like in that time. And of course, with that sea level rise, we're going to see a huge amount of infrastructure and rebuilding that needs to happen. So we know the issue is here. It's kind of at our doorstep. And so we just wanted to begin with kind of where we're at right now. Next slide. This was really a graphic that was done, I believe, by, who is this guy? This is SOS, right? That did a model. Essentially, if we don't lower that degree Fahrenheit, right? If we continue to essentially do nothing and enact, where our picture of Hawaii would be. This is a model for about 100 years out with our downtown Honolulu area, Iolani Palace, all these special areas. So pretty spooky model that, you know, of course, these are all projections, but we really put this in the slide to kind of say, you know, I equate it to really the same reason with the worldwide voyage. We knew the greatest risk was not doing anything at all and sitting still, you know, even though the road might not be clear and might be a difficult sail plan to move forward. We know right now, if we just do nothing in Hawaii, this is going to be our picture. If we don't try to find more sustainable, environmentally friendly solutions that don't emit CO2 to the atmosphere. Okay. So luckily for Hawaii, with our abundance of resources, you know, we have this potential here, and we've already, you know, as citizens, kind of taken a big jump into, you know, already I think about 1 in 3 houses have rooftop solar. We are, as a state, you know, with HB 623, we already committed to becoming 100% renewable by 2045. And so really, just as we back that up to now and trying to grow our local renewable energy industry, we need to be reaching 40% by 2030. So we're trying to kind of back up the numbers and see what with our resources can help us to get to that point. Okay, next slide. The challenge is, you know, being that our island is so populated, right? We kind of see a lot of the low-hanging fruit for most of the areas to find this extra clean energy as it competes with area for land and our comforts of home with spacing away from where, you know, we live and work have kind of been met. You know, not of course on all sides, but we're starting to see some of these things with already overcrowding, wind turbines terrestrially being, you know, conflicting with proximity to homes, and, you know, some competing for available area to farm and to meet the other demands of like housing and things that we already need. So we're trying to find a way to have these conversations to balance all these competing priorities. And for the first time, we're hoping that we can make this process something that's inclusive and not just a top-down approach. Okay. Looking at offshore wind has really become, I'm not sure if you guys saw, this was in this NREL study was the front page of the paper 2 days ago. I believe Nigel might have sent out the article. And that was just a feasibility study, really looking at cost-wise, is it feasible to begin looking at what an offshore wind farm source, right, with a minimal use of land, right? You're only talking about a interconnection area of minimal footprint. We know we have this wind resource. So this is an actual graph where you see in the blue outline area, right, when we start to see the kind of light to dark reds, it's showing that, you know, night and day, we're getting wind speeds on average over a mean of, you know, 20 years, that high 20 to 30 knot winds that would essentially possibly give us that constant power, not just like solar when we have it during the day and we have to store it. We could get that direct power night and day from our wind source right off of Oahu. And the goal that we're looking at is right here. Oh yeah, no, is providing up to about 25% of Oahu's load. That's what our project has been looking at to make an impact. Okay, next slide. So how we plan to get to that 25% is our goal is to create a 400 megawatt floating offshore wind farm. So 400 megawatts would be what we produce. And the range of how many of these turbines are out there really depend on technology. So essentially, the more output one turbine creates, the less of them we'd have to have in our ocean to reach that goal. So right now in the market, you know, they've been tested for anywhere 8 megawatts and 10 megawatts. More commonly now, the ones that are being ordered in this 12 megawatt range. But as Noi said, you know, being 10 years out from COD, we're still looking at the technology increasing. And if we had estimate our project for a 15 megawatt turbine, essentially we'd be looking at around, you know, that 27 to 28 platform range. Hawaii only has one customer as far as energy companies in Hawaii. So we would be supplying directly to HECO. And the location we're looking at is approximately 12 miles off of Oahu and in turn off of Molokai. There's that. So estimated operation date is not until 2032. And the three key partners, this is kind of important. So Progression Energy is the company that we represent. And we have a local team based here. Essentially the larger energy company that helps us and funds the companies, Energy de France. Specifically, they have a renewables portfolio that has renewable projects all globally. And lastly, Principal Power. And Principal Power is responsible for the technology of that floating platform you see there. So between those three partners, that's kind of who are the players in what we're talking about with this project. Okay. This is just a real basic. We're actually missing one, not missing, but just from this side, you can't see one of the anchor lines, but it's essentially anchored to the seabed floor and a submersible platform. Okay, with inner array cables connecting each turbine to another, and essentially before it would land the shore, they come together into a larger cable. But this technology is really what we found, as opposed to a fixed seabed floor that needs to be really close to shore, needs to be drilled into the seabed bottom. For Hawaii's conditions to withstand, as we kind of surveyed the market, this semi-submersible platform is what we found as the most resilient to the kind of conditions that we would have in Hawaii. Next slide. Here's a better look at, for those of mariners out there and you know a little bit about how we anchor. It's essentially kind of go past and drag backwards into that silt, right? We were looking at essentially being in roughly 500 fathoms. So about 3,000 feet of water is what we're like it fluctuates obviously depending on the bathymetry, but you know, being that far offshore, this is the area that way we can stay away from, you know, reef and things like that in our coastal ecosystems. Okay, next slide. And then Noi, did you want to go ahead and talk about our influences?
Sure. So this is probably one of the most complicated projects I've had the opportunity to work on. And these are just the key buckets of influences. I want to share that all the logos on the side do not mean endorsement of this project. What we're trying to show is some of the bigger buckets of who has approval authority and the permitting and regulatory requirements and competitive process that we would have to go in. So in terms of the influences on the project, the level of community participation and stakeholder engagement is ultimately going to make or break the project and its ability to get to the finish line. So that's a constant throughout the entire project. When we look at all of the different things that have to happen, in the next couple of slides, I'll explain Department of Defense. So one of the key things that one of the first gates to get through is whether or not DoD will allow a floating offshore wind project off of Oahu, right? And I'll give some of the history as it relates to that, because currently, and I'll just jump to that slide right now. Currently, if you remember where we said there was wind, in 2016 or 2017, DoD issued this map. This is called the Mission Compatibility Assessment. And everywhere where it's red, DoD has said it's absolutely mission incompatible. It would be a threat to national security to do a wind project. So all of the areas from the previous map that kind of show where there's enough wind are currently in DoD's mind not compatible to national security. So I'll be explaining that we have been in discussions with DoD. We have negotiated a specific area that looks like they'll be willing to approve, but that's the first thing. And then if DoD says, yes, there's an area that can be explored for development, then the Department of the Interior has jurisdiction through the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management, and they come in and they lease the ocean through a federal process and an auction process. And so we would have to then compete with everyone else who would want to lease that part of the ocean. And it kills me to even say that the ocean is being leased, but this is the process. And so we would have to win that auction and that process. And that is a 10-year process that has 3 really deep dives in environmental compliance issues that has 3 different ways that you have to do it over the 10 years. Then we would have to also go through another competitive process with Hawaiian Electric. So first we'd have to convince Hawaiian Electric that offshore wind should be allowed to compete to provide energy. And if Hawaiian Electric says yes, then we would have to compete with everyone who would want to do offshore wind. And only after successfully getting through all of those gates, with DoD saying, yes, you can explore development, BOEM saying, winning the BOEM process, winning the Hawaiian Electric process, then would we be able to go through all of the regulatory and permitting requirements of how we would bring the cables onto shore to be able to land, how we would build the transmission and distribution to connect to the grid, all of those things. So we just wanted to share, there's plenty different pieces that still have to go through. And at this point, the DoD map is where it is. There are 3 potential call areas that have currently been identified. There are 2 in the green. There are 2 official call areas that have been identified. Our area that we're currently looking at is the red area, and that's why it's on this map. The National Renewable Energy Lab just did the study that Austin talked about, and it studied pricing and whether or not it's technically feasible. That's a really small part of it. And what they concluded is it's technically feasible and the pricing would be competitive, but they really carefully and very blatantly outlined there are multiple other things to take a look at that can affect price. The good news is, based on all of the factors that they consider in modeling pricing, there's enough room for all of those other factors to be included, such that we believe by the time you put in interconnection costs and environmental costs and mitigation costs and all of the community participation and stakeholder agreements and everything put together, that the price to do this would still be competitive. So it's still very early. And these are the areas that have been identified. Going back to this is currently the status of what DoD says is compatible with their mission. So again, if you were to put those places all in this map, you would see it's noted red. Red means cannot build. Yellow means you can explore on a fact basis. What we have been doing is we have been in discussions with DoD. We originally, 8 years ago, when I started doing this, we originally were talking about this parcel, this process over here. I mean, this location over here. And for the last 6 years, 6 to 8 years, we've been trying to get this site, and DoD said absolutely not. So where we are right now is that we have been in discussions about this area. This is a 43 nautical mile perimeter, if you look at that area, in identifying whether or not this impacts DoD activities and whether or not they would allow us to explore the development. We are believing that we can get to an agreement with them. And if that's possible, then we would be able to do the requisite studies that are required for that area. In picking this space, it's not just DoD. We have to look at, is there enough wind? Is this, how many animals, are traversing this area? Birds, marine mammals, fish, all of that. What does the bottom look like? How far away from the island is it? What is the visual impact? All of those factors come into play for us to kind of identify what is a potential site. So that is the potential site that we are currently looking at. At the same time, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has been working on a number of studies at the federal level. So we've linked all of those studies here so that they would be easily accessible to anyone who is interested. So when you get this deck, you can kind of take a look at what they're studying. I wanted to provide the timeline. This is only one of the timelines, but I had referred to the BOEM process, right, as being this long, a 10-year process. So there's obviously the HECO process, the BOEM process, and then all of the permitting that would be required and the environmental processes at the state level, at the federal level, and then all of the shoreline, CDUP, all of those processes that the city and county would manage as well. But this is the long, like, kind of stick in the tent in terms of BOEM's 10-year process. We're currently here. If DoD were to say that there could be exploration of the site, then BOEM would come out and they would hold their task force meetings and get feedback from as many stakeholders as possible. Then they would decide whether or not to engage in a leasing process, and then this process would begin. Moving on, we wanted to share who is our Hawaii-based team. So there's myself. I'm born and raised in Hilo and have been working in renewable energy since returning from Washington, D.C. back in 2006. Also, Ren Westcoat, who lives on Oahu and was born and raised on Molokai. Ted Peck, who's on Oahu, who used to be the head of energy for DBED in a former life when the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative first got started. Retired Vice Admiral Denny McGinn. So Denny lives in Maryland, but we consider him a part of our Hawaii team for the amount of time he spends with us and working with us. Denny, in addition to being a 3-star admiral, retired, and pilot who is very familiar with everything within Indo-PACOM, he also served as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy during the Obama administration and has really worked on a lot of the policies. So he's vital to working through our Hawaii connections as well. Then we have Austin, and then we have Katie Schwind, who's from the Big Island, who has been working in the area of renewable energy. Our project team, Austin had talked about, has 3 partners. So there's the Hawaii team and those of us who have worked in building large scale or utility scale renewable energy in Hawaii. And that's primarily Ren and myself. Then we partnered with Electricity de France Renewables. So EDF Renewables is the North American subsidiary of Electricity de France. And the reason we partnered with them is because they have a lot of depth in offshore wind. They have projects, they have a larger staff, and they have the engineering, the technical experience, as well as the projects that they currently are building. So as an example, they're currently partnered with Shell building Atlantic Shores offshore wind off of New Jersey. And so whereas we're proposing to do 400 megawatts, they're actually doing 1.4 gigawatts, which is 1,400 megawatts in New Jersey. And we learn a lot from what they're doing, because that project's going to go in way before our project ever goes in, so we can do lessons learned, et cetera. But as we are planning things, as we're looking at harbors, as we're looking at oceans, we're able to utilize their depth in helping. They also are financially secure enough to be able to pay for the project from development and construction. So it's not like we develop, we enter into all these agreements, and then we got to go sell the project to finance. From the beginning, we have the financing with this partner. And then the third partner is Principal Power. Principal Power is who developed that semi-submersible. And the original engineer, even though he's no longer with the company, is a UH Manoa graduate, Dominique Rodier. So he understood from the years of working on this, he really did understand how to do a project in Hawaii, given all of his work here. When you get this slide deck, there's a Principal Power video here that will take you to a YouTube clip. That's a 5-minute video that shows the 5-year test project that they did on the wind float off of Nazaré in Portugal. So it shows them building it, tugging it out to the site, what it looked like while it was there with 17-meter waves and winds, et cetera, and then how they brought it back and took it all apart. So it shows you the whole cycle of it actually in motion. Our project approach is comprehensive and inclusive, and the value, we really look at Aina as Ohana in terms of all of it, right? It's all connected. And how do we do a project understanding that we are joining an ecosystem, a biosystem that has been here for thousands of years, and how might we be able to do that in a way that's beneficial as opposed to harming it? So that's something that we hold very dear and hold very strong. This is a picture of us when we went out. Our initial, once we got to a point with the Department of Defense where we felt comfortable that we had a shot at them approving it, we immediately went out there, and we also started working with Kuha'o, Auntie Noelani, and Uncle Sig to ask them to help us with the cultural research, naming, and how might we take a look at all of these things if we were going to be doing a project. So we are still in the process of, they're still doing a lot of the research and helping us, but we wanted to start at that point so again, that we could understand. Our second part is proactive engagement and long-term dialogue. Even though I've been talking about offshore wind for the past 8 years, we're finally at a point where we can actually engage with some specifics. So we're very hopeful that DoD will actually approve the site for exploration. And in that point, we'll have someplace specific to start being able to talk to everybody about. We very much so want to hear about concerns. We want to hear all types of mana'o, because we need help in figuring out what should we be considering, what should we be studying, what are the challenges that are out there that we need to think about and consider as we figure out how to move forward and if to move forward, right? And it also, the proactive engagement and long-term dialogue also allows us to consider many different perspectives and to hear about and to engage in a much larger opportunity for innovation in approach, in technology, in how we do things. To be able to do this, we have to have a Hawaii-based team, and we have to have the ability for the finance people as well as the engineers to listen to the Hawaii team. So that's part of the balance, in that this Hawaii team leads the development. We rely on the engineers, we bring in the tech guys, we talk to the finance guys, but they understand and have agreed to let us run the development. And they understand from the very beginning how important community participation, not dialogue, not consultation, but participation is in the successful development of this project, which leads to the opportunity to co-create the new opportunities for Hawaii, as well as I really want to kind of emphasize, it's way too early for us to be asking, can you support us? Or at the same way, I think it's too early to say no can at all. I really think, what we're asking for is the opportunity to explore this together. And that's kind of where we are in terms of this process. The other part is I wear a lot of different hats in the work that I do, and have had the opportunity to work on a lot of community-based space in figuring out solutions for Hawaii. What we will be putting together is a community participation co-creation process, where we're really asking the question, what does participation in a large utility scale project mean? And I don't know the answer, and it drives everybody crazy. We list outcomes because everybody wants to know, what are you talking about, Noi? So we list potentials, but I really don't know what will come out of it. Some people have said, oh, we want to own a part of it. Some people have said, I don't care about the money, I want to be on the committee that tells you how to operate it, right? Some people have said, oh, I want the jobs, I want the education. And to us, I think it's all of the above, right? Because we all live here and are going to die here. So we want to do the best that we can to figure out how to design it in a way that is inclusive and works for all of the communities and individuals and stakeholders affected. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Austin.
Well, yeah, so really just looking at what this means for Hawaii, really already starting kind of now, backing it up, like I said, we've been in a lot of discussions. My piece has been, as a merchant mariner myself, actually, this is my crew members. I had a commercial business and work now with my nonprofit here in Maunalua Bay with a number of different agencies and institutes, but really trying to see what kind of jobs and futures is going to create for Hawaii. So in addition to, setting an example, Hawaii being the leader for the world maybe, and being the kind of first guys to commit to this 100% renewable clean energy, we wanted to see, and not being, it really see it as allowing Hawaii to be self-sufficient, self-resilient, just based off of harnessing these resources that we have here. And then on the plus side, also being able to build resiliency with our jobs, right, with our next generation. So we see, the amount of jobs created is kind of hard to forecast, but just as a ballpark, roughly on when the plant is kind of up and running, around 50 employees. And these are things that are, from our biologists to our operations and maintenance, our tug drivers, crane operators. But early in construction, easy kind of estimate, a low estimate might be something between 200 to 300 jobs in construction, right? As we build out the project and survey the area moving forward. So because of that, we're already talking to, our trade schools, our community colleges, marine education training centers, even into the high schools and programs, and looking at tracks for how can we set up our keiki and our next generation for success now. And if this is a path we're planning for, this is also an important part of the step, in addition to planning for the project. It's making sure that we can keep these jobs in Hawaii where it's available. And so, yeah, this is a kind of a cool opportunity. But again, because this technology for floating ocean wind farms are so new, we're kind of entering a new space. But there are some things that we can start now to try and set up as best we can.
So the last slide just has our contact information. And when you get this deck, please reach out to us. I know when I've done this before, no question is dumb, no question is stupid. And I've been called so many names and have dealt with people's anger in so many different ways. I welcome the opportunity to talk story. I'd much rather be able to answer a question or go find an answer or do the research than people, just not having the answer and feeling like they can't approach us. So with that, we're happy to answer questions.
Great. Mahalo, Austin and Noi, for sharing. Do want to acknowledge that there's comments and questions in the chat. So I'm just gonna go from top to bottom and make sure that we read them and you have a chance to address. And then we'll kind of keep it going with other questions and stuff. First question, Mahina asked, what is the difference between a study area and a call area?
Sure.
That one.
A call area is an area that has been identified by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management as an area that is being considered for leasing. So that's when the only difference, Mahina, is that BOEM has said this is an area that we're considering for lease. The area that we're looking at was not part of BOEM's call areas between 2012 and 2016. And in honesty, those call areas were created because companies came in and said, this is where we want to build. So the South Shore one was Progression Energy saying, we want to lease this area. And the other one was a competitor that came out by KOʻA and said, we want to lease this area. The reason BOEM hasn't come out with an official call area for the next one is because when you remember looking at the DoD map, right now, everything in those areas is mission incompatible. So until that map changes, BOEM cannot issue another call area.
Mahina, hopefully that answers your question. If you wanted to unmute yourself, if you had other questions or comments that you wanted to share, we welcome you. Otherwise, okay, going.
I would probably just echo some of the stuff Malia said in the chat. But a question I did have is with these types of projects, is it typical that a buffer area or like a no entry area be constructed around the project?
No. So this area, the turbines will be roughly general standard is about 1 nautical mile apart. So we fully anticipate and expect people to traverse in between. There probably will be a zone right next to the floating platform that would be a no-go zone just because we don't want people to climb up the platforms without permission. Like, it's not like we want people hanging on the ladders and taking pictures and stuff. So there'll be a no access zone that prevents people from getting right onto the platform itself. But in terms of being able to fish right next to it and to traverse that area, that'll be accessible. Also, the power cord that goes in between the turbines is put at a level that is roughly about 200 to 250 feet below the surface. So it's deliberately done so that it will not interfere with vessels traveling on the surface.
Okay, mahalo.
Mahalo. I'm gonna go to Lori Buchanan, who has some comments about DoD. We can't even get DoD to stop flying into Kalaupapa. We did meet with BOEM years ago and gave them input from practitioners about where they fish, etc. With Lori, if you wanted to unmute and maybe comment or share some mana'o, we welcome you. Aloha.
Aloha, Noi.
Aloha,
nice
Lori.
to see you. Long time no see.
Yep.
Oh my God, girl, you're doing this now. Okay. So, so I'm sorry. I know I never participated with for a long time, but all I'm going to say is because I get way too much feedback is maybe Noi, you can meet with a group of us on Molokai because many years ago, the Bureau came to Molokai and they asked us to participate in one survey, whatever. It took like the whole week, you know. And I really, at that time, encouraged Kupuna to give them feedback. And this was all of our practitioners. with the promise that they was not going to take that information and use it for this type of what we're talking about right now. So I feel kind of like they would use us, they would use practitioner information, but I think I have a lot of feedback because I know a lot more about energy than I did just a few years ago. And so Noi, if you can, you contact me and then we'll make our own meeting.
Yep.
So I don't gotta take up time in the KOʻA meeting. Okay.
I'm happy to do that, Lori.
all my
Mahalo.
feedback right now is yikes. Because
Understood.
I call Marine Corps base every week. I call them. I cannot get it for do nothing for me. And then we went through a lot of routes. So I'm happy that you at one high level that you can talk stories. So mahalo.
Thank you.
I'm gonna read Malia Kutagawa's comments in here, and then I'll welcome you, Malia, if you wanna talk and provide comment as well. Will an EIS be done for this project? I believe a cultural impact assessment is also required. As a member of Kia'i Kanaloa and also a member of the Hawaii Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council, I am concerned about potential impacts to our whales, dolphins, and other marine species. Also, also not sure if there are fishing quota that families have relationship to in this proposed project area. And then Malia goes on, any impact to seabirds also, and any people that may be fishing or going on their boats nearby. I know that the Kahuku Wind Farm many residents on North Shore have complained about health effects. So not sure if there are human impacts who might be boating nearby to this wind structure. Yeah. I want to read these for the recording, yeah, because you can't see it on the chat. But Malia, if you wanted to share Mana'o and share your leo, also up to you. Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, just pretty much that's my question. You know, serving on the Humpback Whale Sanctuary Advisory Council, we have to look at these impacts as well. So
Yes, so the answer is yes. There'll be multiple EIS and comprehensive level EIS types of studies and surveys being done, and the cultural impact assessment. Obviously, there's not obviously, but there's a 343 process, there's a section 106 process, and then there's all the other processes. And then, as you know, with marine mammals, there's the Marine Mammal Act, there's the Endangered Species Act, there's all of the environmental requirements. So again, the studies, up until now, we could only talk in general terms. If we can get to a point where there's an actual site that they allow us to actually explore and study, then we can start counting the birds, counting the animals coming through, you know, the marine mammals, and really assessing with best case scenario what impacts look like, and how things can be assessed. And that will include a lot of the studies. So yes, it's going to be the EIS at the state level, the federal level, and then I'll be glad to send you the BOEM process as well, because there's additional studies that go with that.
and this farm going to feed Oahu, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I know, you know, there's Uaukani at Moomomi area. I don't know how far out the birds venture out, but you know, the colonies on Molokai are beginning to recover. So I'm a little bit worried about them. If they're gonna
Yeah,
go
me
that
too.
close.
Me too. So yeah, I agree. Me too, being that we want to make sure where we cite a project is not going to have that level of impact, right? So do we have to go further? Right now, we've gone as far out as we can based on the technology that we're aware of in terms of being able to moor the platforms at 3,000 feet, right? Meaning the ocean to the bottom. ideally, as a developer, I would like to take it as far out as possible because then people can't see it. It's not a visual impact. It doesn't have the same level. But when I was talking about balancing, that's why we're looking at the depth, the wind resource, as well as the bottom. But based on what we see about the flights of the birds and how high they fly, because these turbines go pretty high, we'll be able to study what the altitude of the flights, et cetera, look like.
Mahalo, Noe.
Thank you, Malia.
Mahalo, Malia. I'm gonna loop Kavika in because he has another question regarding birds. So go ahead, Kavika.
Yeah. Hello, Hanoi. Nice to see you
Aloha,
again.
Kavika. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think most everybody knows I've been involved in seabird conservation for about 15 years. Previously as a director of Limahuli Garden and Preserve, where we still had breeding colonies of endangered a'o and endangered ua'u. Both are actually critically endangered. And dealing with all of the impacts of the power infrastructure of KOʻC on Kauai and things like that. And more recently, through my appointment as a member of the state's Endangered Species Recovery Committee. So seabirds and windmills are at the front of my attention. They're clearly an existential threat to our critically endangered seabirds. So what's the plan to do this? You mentioned studies. I mean, right now, seabirds are at their lowest population ever for these species. And the idea is not that they stay low, but they actually increase. So whatever studies are done is only going to show whatever 1% of their population is doing right now. If we can get recovery of these species, there's going to be a lot more activity everywhere. And I have a follow-up question after you answer that one. Thanks.
Yeah. So the studies inform, right, as you're aware with as being a part of the committee, right, for a project to get permitted with a habitat conservation plan, you have to provide a net benefit to the species, right? So the studies inform how you provide that net benefit to help the species thrive, right? So the studies is just the first part, right? We'd be having to look again, I think, at how far they fly, what the paths are with the most frequent flying, what altitudes they're flying at. We'd also take a look at the projects that are up in other areas of the world and use, although it's not the same as this particular species, what are we seeing in terms of just birds and turbines with floating offshore wind, right? I think also learning from a lot of the lessons that we've learned from the terrestrial, right? Back when we were first developing Koiloa and the first Kuku wind farm and Kahiava, and we were estimating as best as we could with the Hawaiian hoary bats, we didn't understand what we know now, right? So how do we take those lessons learned and make sure that those same mistakes don't get done, right? And what additional kinds of things can we do? So that's, in terms of what's next, that's next. The other thing is the earliest we could get a notice to proceed if everything went well and if we were able to clear every gate would be 2029. So there really is from a development standpoint, I'm like trying to do as much as I can to put it into place so that we can actually get there, because delays on the front end equal 5-year delays on the back end, right? But from a can you study, can you design the project, can you adequately or appropriately address the level of impact on birds, on marine mammals? I think given the time that we have, the answer would be, I think we have the time to try to figure that out, but we'd have to all be doing it together.
Okay, mahalo. And then my follow-up question. So I'm also on the Sanctuary Advisory Council with Malia Akutagawa, and I think Auntie Maka'ala is on this call too. So there's 3 of us, the Sanctuary Advisory Council here. And, so whales are definitely an issue, and I acknowledge that, but I do have a follow-up question about the seabirds. I'll focus on that today. So I think somebody came and gave a presentation. I think it was the one who did the feasibility study to the SAC. And it was one of us brought up, it might've been me, a question about, seems like the one obvious solution would be to do vertical axis turbines instead of horizontal. And the answer, always seems like an excuse, like, oh, we're not yet at production scale or whatever, but I mean, we're talking 10 years out. And I think that that's a lot of time for R&D of things like this. They're already in effect. I don't, you know, I don't like fossil fuels more than anybody else on this call, but it seems like if developers were to lead with a statement like our number one thing is to make sure the endangered species, the capital of the world, doesn't lose one more species. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to commit to vertical access turbines, but I don't hear that kind of stuff, which is a little bit, honestly, it's a little bit frustrating. Just seems like developers not going to make as much money with that technology, so they're going to make excuses not to explore it. But you know, that's why it's an opportunity to ask instead of no in the background. So I wanted to put it straight to you.
Yeah, thank you. And that is, that is frustrating. I think that as developers, nobody wants to be the one that it creates the extinction of a species, right? So let's address that from the values-based and beginning, and start with how do we explore it. I don't know that vertical access is the answer either. I'll be honest with you, given where it is from an R&D perspective, and given how much wind and the scale to which it will be available within the time frame, right? That doesn't mean we don't take a look and see how might we figure out what we can do on the turbines to see how we mitigate impact, right? There's, 15 years ago, we didn't have iPhones. Look at us now. What can we figure out with the turbine? So I don't know that it's either vertical or horizontal. I'd like to be open to starting from the standpoint of how do we not be responsible for causing a species to go extinct? And going from that, then even if we were to utilize a design thinking mode, what might be available, as opposed to all we know is this level of development in turbine and this is all we have. How might we innovate? That's the best answer I can give you. It's not, I know it's not satisfactory, but in all honesty, I don't know where the vertical turbines will be and if they'll ever reach that level of scale, and if there's not a better solution somewhere else that we're not looking at.
Yeah, so, and thank you for that. And I think one of the reasons why how we can get the industry there is by developers saying, this is our only option, so let's make it happen. And so I would love it to hear that from you folks. Thank you.
Hello. I'm just going down the list, in the chat. So Auntie Lori has another question. Would they be covered under energy system, homeland security? Sorry, I might have lost the context of when that question had popped up. Not sure if Auntie Lori, you wanted to jump back in. Maybe not.
And to answer that, I don't know if the question is it a threat to national security or homeland security, or is it a part of homeland security? So these would not be defense weapons. There would not be things to be utilized for DoD. In all honesty, DoD would like us not to have it, but I mean, given their operations, but they have also made a commitment to clean energy.
Hello. Ashley has a few comments in here. With New England offshore wind setting the precedent for this decade, are there things that you're seeing, example, permitting, stakeholder engagement, marine spatial planning, that you'd like to change or improve on with the potential development of Hawaii's offshore wind?
Definitely. I think that's where we benefit from the lessons learned in things. And I also think having a Hawaii-based team with the level of experience in the different areas that we all work in is helpful, because we can kind of think out of the box. And given the level of influence our partners are giving us to make these decisions and to guide how they're making decisions, I think is super important, or else none of us would be working on this project. With that being said, I really do think there are things that we can improve upon. There are certain things that are geographic specific in how people deal with each other versus how we deal with each other in Hawaii, right? So definitely learn from the mistakes, but also build upon the things that are working. There's an entity that I've been in discussions with for the last 6 years that I think also came through Molokai to help when Emilia was doing all the work she was doing with Sustainable Molokai. And they've been representing community in working with and fisheries, in working with wind, offshore wind developers, in coming up with solutions up in Maine in some of the projects that are there. So they had some really good insight and to learn from, as well as did some of the developers in Australia.
Again, just going down the list, yeah. If you have questions, Adam, recognizing also that it's 4 o'clock. Noya and Austin, are we still good to continue on with this discussion? Yeah, mahalo.
Yep, absolutely.
So Kinohi has a comment. The Waimanalo community also requests a community meeting to address our concerns as well. And Kinohi, if you wanted to voice that as well.
Yeah, as a kupaina of Waimanalo, yeah, it sounded like a real big red flag when another community, doesn't want it, or, the DOD wouldn't allow it in a certain area, and then it's then placed on the outside of my hometown is kind of concerning to me. And I appreciate the fact that you guys went to, the big island Ohana for cultural reasons, but I feel like the adjacent communities might wanna, have some conversations about, all of the things, culturally, spiritually, and environmentally. So mahalo, that's all. I think, just like Auntie Lori said, I will be in touch with you guys.
We welcome that. Thank you very much, and we look forward to talking story with the Waimanalo community and the cultural practitioners and the kupuna as well. And to be clear, the DOD objection to the south site was based on their operations with aviation, surface, ships, and the entrance to Pearl Harbor and the submarines.
Mahalo for that clarification.
Auntie Lori has another comment. I would like to know how these massive offshore wind energy. Wait, did we ask this one? No. Okay. I would like to know how these massive offshore wind energy projects developed by non-local, mainland, international developers and the federal government address energy justice for Hawaiians.
That's the whole purpose of the community participation co-creation process that we're working on. So luckily, with the work that Austin and I have done in some of the other areas, and the training that we've had in co-creation and how you involve people and how you come up with additional solutions and looking outside the box, defining energy justice, hearing the voices on what that is, that's all included in what does community participation mean. I tried to get, we tried to distinguish create the biggest and broadest term to include all of that. And when I keep going back to the fact that the mainland companies are empowering us and have committed to us to allow for these discussions, not allow, but have encouraged these discussions, at the same time, it's not like I have we can do everything. We're going to be very honest in these discussions about this is feasible, this is not feasible. And we're not going to lie and promise everything that we know we cannot be able to provide. The same way when Kavika asked me about vertical turbines, right? I got to give you a straight up and honest answer that I have and I can, understanding where the industry is and where the project partners are. But the process allows us to explore that. So energy justice for Hawaiians would definitely be something to be addressed and to be discussed in that process.
Yeah, and just real quickly, if I can add to that, I mean, one thing going through this process, we've been participating in the monthly community board meetings as far as participants, and then presenting whenever we're asked, whether it's the advisory or to actual on the nights of the community board meeting, to Waimanalo, Kaneo, He Kailua, and Kahalu community board. And so even at this 10 years out, we're trying to have as much of an ear, if not, like Noi said, to gain favor, to sway, but that if you hear something in the news or you see something doesn't feel right, or that you guys have a point of contact that hopefully don't have to go search for, to find a phone number and an email to call and say, hey, can we talk more about this? So I definitely just want to mahalo you guys for the concern. And not being from these communities, it's been very important to try and understand as much as I can and be a part, as a representative for the company, as we kind of all move forward to hopefully just build dialogue together, whatever the outcome may be.
You can move down Antimaka Ala with some comments. With 3 cables from the platform to the ocean floor on each turbine, the array becomes a net for sea creatures of all kinds. Yeah, and Antimaka Ala, I give you the floor to make more comments.
Mahalo. Can you hear me all right? My computer
Yes.
has a way of needing to warm up. Nice to see all of you. Many of your faces I haven't seen in a while. My concern is I do sit on the Hawaii State Environmental Council, and so 343 is in my wheelhouse, but I am concerned about the larger impact when we put all these things together. What's the difference between what one turbine does and 20 do? So at some point I would like some math or some formula about how many of these devices are needed in order to produce the kind of power that you believe you need, believe we need. And I've seen studies previously. This isn't the first time we've had presentations like this before the sanctuary too. And if you look at those 3 cables that come down from each turbine and you multiply that out, it's a net. And we don't know a whole lot about what goes where. We just don't. And so one of the questions that I would like addressed, maybe not today, is what is the potential? I'll ask both of them, Nigel, so you don't have to bounce the second one. What is the potential for doing a very, very small scale in the pilot to take a look at some of those things that we don't even know enough about to ask? So that's two requests, and I know that some of the concerns will be the same as they are for other locations, but none of us see ourselves that way. We all see ourselves as unique and having very specific critters to take care of and so forth. It wasn't that many years ago, Noi, that I had a presentation from BOEM that said, to the sanctuary, that said, this is no concern about the whales because the cables are on the ground. They're on the bottom, on the seafloor. This is no concern. And not that many years later, we discovered the whales go down there and roll around. So in my lifetime, I've seen that big example of what we didn't know and how important it was. And so I'm always skeptical of starting out with what might be more economically feasible of a larger project, but asking always start small, do the concentrated look, and do the monitoring and the studying, asking questions then that you didn't know to ask. So I'm sorry I put all that in one big thing, but I think it's important for us to look at these things in phases and stages and parts and pieces and a progression rather than here we come and we're building 100 of them. Mahalo.
Thank you, Auntie. So I think that's something to take a look at. That's one of the things that we were considering. Could we do a pilot, and would that work? So I think that's something that's definitely something that can be considered. I think we'd also have to take a look at all of the costs associated, right? Is it the same, and could we concurrently permit? You know, there's lots of ways to kind of work through that. In terms of the number, you know, right now what we are looking at for 400 megawatts is 27 platforms if we use a 15 megawatt turbine, right? Or 34 platforms if we use a 12 megawatt turbine, and that's just straight math. You know, 400 divided by 12 and 400 divided by 15. Those are the biggest turbines available. Now, the size of the turbine may have to change based on what we learn about the birds, right? Or what we learn about, or the number of platforms may have to change in the area depending on what we learn about the whales or the dolphins or the marine mammals and or the fish, right? So that's the, you know, I'm answering both questions. In terms of, I think we would want to consider whether or not we can do a pilot to be able to answer those questions. And then two, on the number of platforms, I think that's what the studies will help us to understand as well. And then on the whether or not it creates this entangled net, I think depends on, that's why we study what does the ocean floor look like, what is the circle with which the floating turbine can move, so you know how much slack are in the mooring lines, how you do it. And then to be clear, within the 43 nautical miles is where the platforms would be in that perimeter that we outlined. And then there would be the power cords that would connect certain turbines that I had referred to that would be below 200 to 250 feet. And where the depth is will have to be studied as well, because the first thing is you don't want to catch any ships at the same time. The second thing is you want to make it, you don't want to entangle a marine mammal either, right? And then when you get to the perimeter of that area, then it does go all the way down to the seafloor. So then we would have to study, right? What are the whales doing on the seafloor, and how might we protect them if there's a need to, if there's any danger. So thank you very much for pointing that out, because now I'll go look for those studies, because I wasn't aware of that.
Thank you. I just, you know, it concerns me that we have, it's not a challenge to you, but that we often find ourselves in these conversations where we're expected to know a whole lot of stuff, you know, like this guy goes from here to there, that season, not that season, da 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 da. That's not my job. That's not, not my job. You're the guy that wants to do something. It's your job to get the information and come back and tell us. And I don't want you to do it with 50 turbines. I want you to do it with a couple somewhere, if you do it at all. After, you know, and I do have some concerns, personal concerns about the equity and the social justice and some of this too, to make sure that there is whatever is impacted, whether it's the species that requires some mitigation or whether it's the people that require some extra help or whatever, that be part of any plan and proposal. Mahalo.
I'm just gonna read Ashley's comment on here. Hi Kavika, are you familiar with the D-Trek wind energy bird strike system? I recently met a few representatives at an offshore wind conference, and their bird and bat radar system may interest you. Then there's a website, yeah. So that's in the chat. Maybe Uncle Mac, I don't know if you get manao that you wanted to share. Imagine you have some manao, so.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. Sitting over here and listening to our decision that different people will be making on our behalf. And I say that because this project is being done in Hawaii, but it seems like the people from Hawaii don't really get to say anything about the final decision. And like Laurie said, boom, came to Molokai, spent, the whole week over here, getting manao from us. And now this is happening, kind of like they just went dig out and did what they wanted to do anyway. I'm kind of not sitting well with the decision that people actually can lease the ocean.
Right.
Maybe they've been doing that, all along, but this is kind of like my first experience to hear it. Like, oh, you gotta lease the ocean. Oh, wow. I thought that was like state jurisdiction, but I guess the feds supersede the state. So they're gonna bypass the state and do what they like. I know I'm hearing all the different processes that gotta go through, but in reality, it's the feds that deciding. And kind of not sit well with me because, hey, if I was living in Oahu, I'd be screaming because as the guys they're gonna supply. Now, what's gonna happen after they harness all this energy that they harvesting from Hawaii? What benefits do we get, or the people that they're gonna serve? What benefits do they get from harnessing all this free energy? I think the people should have some kind of benefit to that, not just the decision making, but what come out of that. Yeah, just like the rail. I mean, I'm thinking about the rail. Like, it's some big mess, and the people won't pay for that. I don't know. I just trying to look how this thing going to balance out, and hopefully the thing come out good. That's all I'm hoping, because I see a lot of failure in a lot of things that, and this is just one exploratory kind of project. Never really happened in Hawaii before. And I think the channel speak for itself. When you talk about the raw fish channel in Hawaii, you like put your hale over there, go and get consequences. Go and get. Are they prepared for all this? I don't know who will pay for the damage, all this kind of stuff. Get plenty of stuff. Anyway, I'm going all over the place now. But anyway, I hope you get the picture what I'm talking about. Mahalo.
Thank you, Uncle. And I greatly appreciate that and hope that we can talk story too. I'll coordinate with Laurie and come over and sit down. This is a long process to talk. And I think that, again, at the community participation process, in terms of what you're talking about, in terms of the energy justice and people benefiting as much, that protecting people as much as you protect species and resources, and balancing all of that is going to be vitally important. And it took me a long time, and I still cannot even do this presentation without saying, yeah, they're going to lease the ocean. So I understand.
Mahalo. I mean, no, there was one question at the end that maybe you can shed light on. Like, if stuff was to happen to the turbines, whose responsibility would it be to clean it up?
Ours. It would be the developer's responsibility, and all of that will be negotiated in every permit. With a power purchase agreement, for example, if we were to be selected by Hawaiian Electric to provide power, we would be required to also put in a bond to take everything down and remove it. Similarly, in that if there's any damage or if there's any mess, we would be required to clean it up. When you look at the state permits, there are processes within that as well. And I'd have to go back and look and see which one. So I don't know enough right now to tell you. I got to go back and reread all the statutes, but there would be requirements that we would have to agree to. That's the whole point of having regulatory compliance, if I put my old policy hat back on.
Kevin has in a chat a quote from a show, Yellowstone. I gotta read it. Rourke said, my dad told me once there would come a day when my only job left is fishing because no one else has figured out how to own the ocean. Beth says, yeah. Rourke says, that's right, but I'm working on it. Kevin, if you wanted to share more mana'o.
I just thought that was an interesting quote. This happened to be on a TV show this week, so it's an interesting show. But I appreciate everybody who called in and has mana'o to share. I mean, the purpose of this is really to learn and provide feedback, and figure out all what we think. So I just mahalo everybody for calling in.
Hello, Kevin. Auntie Maka, I'll put in again on question, what kind of monitoring is envisioned? We don't know what we don't know. Is it possible a small pilot project can be installed and a comprehensive studies can learn from that? And
Just wanted to put it in the record because I said it out loud, but it wasn't in my written question. And it's akin to what Mac was saying. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know what to ask. We don't know what to expect. We don't know. So there needs to be, as with any project, certain benchmarks. Stop, check back. What happened? Stop, check back. Did something occur that we didn't know about? And that's not normally done in any kind of development where you go a little ways and you stop and look back, or look around. So I'm getting, the older I get, the bigger I'm getting on that. Just don't try to do everything at once. One, two at a time, and then take a look. Open your ears, think, and then maybe the next two. And I know I don't understand the technology, but if Cousteau can sail his boat with a vertical sail, I don't know. How hard can it be to have a vertical turbine that would use, maybe it's just scale, right? But yeah, it just seems like so much less impact to a lot of things because of the vortex, da da da.
I'd like to add to Auntie's question there to so
it's 4:20 now. I will get ready.
Yeah, so what I was thinking is you got the Kelly versus Oceanside case. You also got the Pohakuloa case, yeah, where we got public trust resources involved here. Ceded lands are state waters. So there is a heightened responsibility to do that monitoring, and to say like any conditions that are imposed to ensure that they're followed through with. And then, added to that is Article 12, Section 7 of the Hawaii State Constitution. So public trust and Hawaiian rights, and the public trust also includes Hawaiian rights, that needs to be assessed in your EIS and cultural impact assessment. And I encourage you to follow the KOʻA framework as well, yeah, on the consultation and looking at impacts and mitigating.
Yep. Thank you. I just looked at the KOʻA yesterday, in fact. So thank you.
Yeah.
Mahalo. I'm gonna take off my facilitator hat and kind of share some of my mana'o. I fish out that side for 5 years now off the boat. The area that you're talking about, the 1,000 fathom and 12 miles offshore is ahi ground. That's where folks are going to look for ahi. Especially that side, the water is bust. So like Uncle Max point about putting it in a channel that is very treacherous. I'd be really wary of that. Again, the proximity and the closeness of the turbines and the vast area that you folks are proposing is kind of alarming and scary. If I catch an ahi or an marlin, the thing might take us 1 mile. And if that thing entangles around the turbine, we're gonna have a problem, right? So I guess my suggestion would be to kind of really talk to the fishermen who use that side. Again, seasonality, otarus and aku in certain times of the year are known to go on that side, and almost to the date, right? So maybe thinking about closures or thinking about cycling on and off potentially to address those kind of like seasonal concerns, right? And yeah, I said these to folks before, just to reiterate, like really to spend time honestly at the harbor, Kaneohe Bay Harbor, Heia here, as well as Hawaii Kai, talking to all the boats that go out there. It's not the commercial guys really, it's semi-commercial people with, I don't know, that's like when 18 to 30 foot boat that is in those areas. And so really just talking with them, seeing how it might affect their fishing and their practice. Again, there's bottom fishing stuff too. So with the bottom fishing areas, all the benthic changes that you folks are proposing is also gonna affect that, right? And yeah. Yeah, sharing those. So.
One last thing I want to share with you folks. So you know, I'm part of the Ahakiole. So it's Uncle Mac, Auntie Lori, Mahina. So you know, it's part of the Ahamoku system. So I just put in a chat the final rules of practice and procedures for Ahamoku. While the statewide advisory committee is kind of defunct because the governor has not appointed any new people, new seats to the AMAC. Our island councils, to a certain extent, have been functioning. And so part of the Ahamoku is to provide Native Hawaiian, indigenous best practices. So included in these rules is the way to assess, yeah. So we have by the different VAL, we have the different resource realms of the ancient Ahakiole operationalized in here, as well as the Kapa'akai framework and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples for free, prior, and informed consent. So I would just encourage you guys to follow this methodology in terms of consultation. That it's not gonna be merely informing us of what's a done deal and what's gonna happen, but actually engage with community in a meaningful way that is in alignment with FPIC.
Mahalo, Malia. Definitely. Thank you very much for citing all the sources, especially the case law, and for connecting with Auntie Max and Uncle Ku's case. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Gonna give us a second if anybody else has mana'o, Chikavika. Any mana'o questions? Last comments? Let's sit in awkward silence for at least 20 seconds, okay? Yeah. So mahalo again, Noy and Austin for sharing. If there's ever interest or you need folks to talk to, reach out. And we can connect folks. We can keep having these dialogues as much as folks on the call want them. Austin and Noy are very open to it. So mahalo again for making time, and mahalo.
Awesome. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Great to see you all.
We're going to share our slide deck, with everybody that